Take her away.
So Reginald Vane said it the way another man might call for the port, and the long table at Harcourt Hall went so still that Eleanor heard the candles. 40 wax tapers, all lit for the harvest dinner, hissed and guttered in the draught from the opened doors, and that small sound was the loudest thing in the room. Her uncle did not look at her. He looked at his guests, at the rector and the magistrate, and the 3 matrons in their autumn silks, and he let his pointing finger hang in the air above the white cloth, as though she were a dish sent back to the kitchen. "My niece," he went on, "has shamed this family past mending. I will not have her at my table, nor under my roof, an hour longer. Take her away." 2 footmen stepped forward from the wall. Eleanor stood at the foot of the table, where she had been seated, deliberately, below the salt, below even the rector's curate, and she felt every eye in the room slide toward her, and then away, the way eyes slide off a thing too ugly to be seen. Her hands were cold. She had worn her one good gown, the dove-grey poplin she had turned and pressed herself, because her uncle had told her this dinner mattered, that the great folk of 3 counties would be present, and she had been fool enough to believe she was being asked to it, and not arranged for it. She did not weep. She had learned, in 5 years, under Reginald Vane's charity, that tears were a coin he liked to be paid in, and she would not pay him. She lifted her chin and reached for the back of her chair, meaning to walk out under her own power before any footman's hand could touch her sleeve, and she had got as far as 1 step when a chair scraped at the head of the table. The Duke of Wexcombe rose. He was the reason the candles had been lit and the good plate brought up from the cellar. He was the guest whose acceptance had set the whole county trembling for a fortnight. Eleanor had seen him only once that evening, at a distance, a tall, broad-shouldered man in dark blue who filled the doorway when he came through it and made the lintel look ill-measured. He had said almost nothing through 3 courses. He had taken 1 glass of wine and watched the room the way a man watches a field before a storm. Now he stood, and the whole table turned to him as a garden turns to the sun, and her uncle's pointing finger wilted and came down. "Your Grace," Reginald said, and his voice climbed half a register. "Forgive the unpleasantness. A family matter. It is already mended." The Duke did not answer him. He came down the length of the room instead, unhurried, his boots loud on the boards where the carpet ended, past the magistrate and the matrons and the rector who half rose and did not know whether to bow. He came all the way to the foot of the table, to the place below the salt, and he stopped in front of Eleanor. She had time to see that his eyes were grey, a darker grey than her gown, and that there was something in them that was not pity, which was the only thing she had braced herself against. Pity she could have borne by going stiff under it. This was not that. This was a kind of recognition, as though he had been looking for her in the room all evening, and had only now found her, and the strangeness of it stopped her breath. He put out his hand. It was a large hand, brown from the sun, the hand of a man who rode and did not always wait for a groom. He held it out to her, palm up, in front of the rector and the magistrate and the 3 counties, and he said, in a voice pitched to carry to every corner of that silenced room, "Miss Vane, will you take my arm?" For 1 whole heartbeat Eleanor did not move, because the words made no sense. Men did not offer their arms to women being turned out of doors. Dukes did not cross rooms for the disgraced niece below the salt. She looked at the offered hand, and then at his face, hunting it for the trick, for the cruelty dressed up clever, because in her experience, kindness from a powerful man was only cruelty that had not yet shown its teeth. She found no teeth. She found him waiting, perfectly still, holding the whole room hostage, with nothing but an open hand. And some instinct older than her caution put her cold fingers into his warm ones. His hand closed over hers. It was not a gentle clasp, it was firm, deliberate, the grip of a man taking hold of something he did not mean to let go, and the warmth of it went up her arm like the first sip of brandy on a winter road. He drew her hand to the crook of his elbow and laid his other hand over it, holding it there, anchoring her against his side, and he turned them both to face her uncle down the length of the table. "So, Reginald," the Duke said, "I came tonight to take the measure of your house. I have taken it." Her uncle's face had gone the colour of tallow. "Your Grace, I beg you will not let a wayward girl's—" "You will not," the Duke said, quite softly, "speak of this lady again in my hearing as you have spoken of her tonight. Not the word away. Not the word shame. Not one word." He let that sit a moment in the appalled silence. "Miss Vane leaves Harcourt this hour. That much you and I agree upon. But she leaves on my arm, as my guest. And any man at this table who wishes to dispute her honour may apply to me directly in the morning. I keep early hours." No one applied. The magistrate found something fascinating in his wine. The rector's curate had gone the colour of his own bands. One of the matrons made a sound like a kettle, and was hushed by her neighbour. And Eleanor Vane, who had risen from her chair that evening expecting to walk out of the only roof she had, into the October dark with nothing but a borrowed cloak, walked out instead, on the arm of the most powerful man in 3 counties, her cold hand pinned warm beneath his, and she did not understand one moment of it. The night air struck her at the door. The harvest moon was up over the stubble fields, vast and copper, and the gravel of the sweep was pale under it. The Duke's carriage stood waiting, black and gleaming, with a crest on the door she could not read in the dark, and a pair of greys stamping in the traces. A footman sprang down. Somewhere behind them, inside, the dinner table erupted into the low, frantic buzz of people who have just watched something they will be repeating for 20 years. Eleanor stopped on the top step. She took her hand out from under his. It cost her something to do it. The warmth had been so sudden and so total. And she turned to face him. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. "Then I will not get into your carriage." She expected anger. Men of his rank were not accustomed to the word no, least of all from a girl in a turned gown who had nowhere on this earth to sleep. But the Duke only looked at her, and in the moonlight she saw the corner of his mouth move, not quite a smile. "You are wise to say so," he said. "A strange man, a dark road, a carriage you cannot see the inside of. Any sensible woman would refuse." He glanced back at the lit windows of Harcourt, where a shape that might have been her uncle stood watching them. "But I would ask you to weigh the road you do know against the one you don't. Behind that door is a man who has just told 3 counties you are not fit to sit at his table. He will not unsay it. Whatever you go back to in there is colder than anything you will find with me. And I think you know it." She did know it. That was the cruelty of it. He had laid the truth out plainly, as though she were a person who could be reasoned with rather than managed, and the novelty of being reasoned with nearly undid the composure that her uncle's contempt had not touched. "Why?" she said. Her voice came out lower than she meant. "You have never spoken to me in your life. Why would you cross that room?" The Duke was quiet for a moment. The greys stamped. The harvest moon climbed. Somewhere an owl went over the stubble. "Because I knew your father," he said. It was the last thing she had expected, and it landed in her like a stone dropped into a deep well. She felt it strike something far down that she had walled over years ago and tried not to sound. Her father. Captain Edmund Vane, 8 years in the churchyard at Harcourt, lost to the sea fever the winter she was 17, before her uncle had ever sent for her, before Harcourt, before the dove-grey gown and the place below the salt. No one spoke of her father here. Her uncle had taken his late brother's name and his late brother's house, and had buried the man himself so thoroughly that Eleanor sometimes feared she was the only soul left alive who remembered the sound of his laugh. "You knew my father," she repeated. The words did not feel safe in her mouth. "I did, and I owe him a debt I have spent 8 years not knowing how to pay." The Duke held out his hand again, not commanding this time, only offered, the way one offers a thing that may be refused. "I cannot pay it to him." So I would ask you to let me begin, tonight, by taking you somewhere warm. My grandmother keeps the dower house at Wexcombe, 10 miles from here, and she is the most respectable and most disagreeable woman in England. You will be chaperoned past any breath of scandal, and scolded for your posture within the hour. Will you come? A grandmother, a dower house, a chaperone. He had answered, without being asked, every objection a woman in her position would think to raise, and the thoroughness of it told her he had thought about her safety, her name, her fear, before he had ever risen from his chair. No one had thought about Eleanor Vane in a very long time. She looked at his open hand in the copper moonlight. She thought of the cold corridor behind her and the man in the window watching. She thought of her father, who had folded his letters in thirds and pressed them with his thumbnail and signed them with a little leaping bird, and who had told her, the last winter of his life, hand hot with fever, that the world was not so dark as it looked from a sick room, that there were good men in it still, and that she must promise to let one of them help her some day and not be too proud. She had been too proud for 8 years. My father, she said carefully, signed everything with a kingfisher, a little bird leaping. It was on his ring. Something moved in the Duke's face. She was watching for it, and she saw it. A flicker, quickly mastered, that was almost like being struck. Fidem servo, he said quietly. I keep faith. Yes, I know the bird. And Eleanor Vane, who had decided 8 years ago to need no one, put her hand a second time into the hand of a man she did not know, and let him hand her up into the dark carriage, because he had named the bird, and because for the first time since she was 17 she felt, absurdly, dangerously, that she was being kept faith with. The door shut. The carriage rocked forward over the gravel. Through the small window, she watched Harcourt Hall slide away behind her, all its lit windows and all its appalled guests, the only home she had been given, and the one she had just been thrown out of. And she found, to her own astonishment, that her strongest feeling was not grief. It was the feeling of a held hand. The warmth of it was still in her fingers. 10 miles of dark road ahead, and she closed her cold hand over the warm memory of it, and held on. The Duke of Wexcombe sat across from her in the swaying dark, and he was a stranger, and he had crossed a room for her, and she did not yet know, she could not have known, sitting there with the harvest moon swinging in the carriage window, how much it would cost them both before she learned why. The dower house at Wexcombe was smaller than Harcourt, and warmer by half, and the Dowager Duchess of Wexcombe was, as advertised, the most disagreeable woman Eleanor had ever met. She received them in a drawing room ablaze with firelight, at an hour when most women her age were 3 hours abed, sitting bolt upright in black bombazine, with a deerhound the size of a calf asleep across her slippers, and a glass of ratafia at her elbow, that she plainly used for courage rather than refreshment. She was perhaps 70. She had her grandson's grey eyes and none of his patience, and she looked Eleanor up and down with the frank appraisal of a woman buying a horse. Turned gown, she announced. Pressed it yourself. Good seams. Posture like a fence post. Sit, child, before you fall over. Gabriel, what have you done? I have brought you a guest, grandmother. You have brought me a scandal in dove-grey poplin, which is a different article entirely. The dowager snapped her fingers, and the deerhound lifted its great head, and a maid appeared from nowhere with tea. Sit, both of you. Eleanor Vane. Yes, I know your name. I knew it before he did. The whole county has known nothing else for a fortnight. Your uncle has seen to that. Drink your tea. You are shaking. I am not, Eleanor began, and discovered that she was. The warmth of the room had reached the cold place the night had put in her, and her hands rattled the cup against the saucer. She set it down. There, said the dowager, not unkindly. Shock. It comes on after, never during. During, a sensible woman is too busy. Gabriel, stop looming. You make the room small. Go and stand by the window, where you are decorative and silent. To Eleanor's astonishment, the Duke of Wexcombe, who had faced down 3 counties an hour ago with one open hand, went and stood by the window, where he was decorative and silent. He folded his arms. The firelight caught the side of his face, and Eleanor, watching him from under her lashes while the dowager talked, saw that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 28, and that the gravity she had read as age was something else. Grief, she thought, or its near cousin. A man carrying a weight he had carried so long, he had stopped feeling it as weight. "Now," said the dowager, when the tea had done its work and Eleanor's hands were her own again. "You will sleep here tonight, and tomorrow, and for as many nights as it takes my grandson to do whatever foolish, noble thing he has decided to do. And you will be chaperoned by me, who am beyond reproach, and have buried 2 husbands and feared neither. So no living tongue will dare wag about your virtue while you are under my roof. Is that understood?" "It is very generous," Eleanor said, "and I cannot accept it." The deerhound lifted its head. The dowager's eyebrows climbed toward her cap. "I beg your pardon. You have been very kind, both of you, and I am more grateful than I can say." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap to stop them moving. "But I am not a fool, Your Grace, whatever my uncle told that table tonight. A young woman of no fortune, taken into a duke's house in the dark, chaperoned or not. There is only one name the world gives her in a month, and it is a worse name than the one I left at Harcourt. I will not trade one ruin for a softer one. If you will lend me the price of a coach to my mother's cousin in Bath, I will repay it the moment I am able, and I will trouble neither of you again." There was a silence. The fire popped. By the window, the Duke unfolded his arms. "She is right," he said. "Of course she is right," snapped the dowager. "She is the first sensible word spoken in this house tonight, and you brought her here knowing it. Well, Gabriel, you have rescued the girl and ruined her in the same evening, which is precisely the sort of half-finished gallantry your father was famous for. What do you mean to do about it?" Eleanor looked between them. There was a current running under this conversation that she could not see the bottom of. Some old quarrel, some old grief, the name your father landing on the Duke like a blow he was used to taking. "I mean," the Duke said slowly, "to do the thing I should have come prepared to do, and did not. Because I am a coward who hoped the situation would be simpler than it was." He turned from the window and looked at Eleanor directly, and the firelight made his grey eyes very dark. "Miss Vane, there is a way to take a woman into a duke's protection that no tongue in England can touch, and it is the oldest way there is. But I will not name it tonight, when you are frightened and shaking and have nowhere else to go. Because a thing offered to a desperate woman is not offered at all. It is simply a better cage." He inclined his head. "Sleep. Eat. Let my grandmother bully you for 3 days. When you are not afraid, when you could walk out of that door to Bath tomorrow and choose not to, then I will ask you a question. Not before." And he bowed to her and to his grandmother, and he left. Eleanor sat very still in the firelight, the deerhound's chin now heavy and warm across her feet, and tried to understand a man who would offer a thing and then refuse to offer it until she was strong enough to say no. "He means marriage, child," said the dowager, draining her ratafia. "In case the subtlety was wasted on you, don't look like that. Drink your tea. You'll need your wits, because nothing about my grandson is as simple as it sounds, and the sooner you learn it, the safer you'll be." She stayed 3 days, and then she stayed. She had meant to take the coach. She woke the first morning in a bed softer than any she had slept in since her father's house, with the sun on a strange ceiling and the smell of someone else's baking bread coming up the stairs. And she lay for a long while, planning her sensible escape to Bath. Then she came down to breakfast, and the dowager put her to work. Not the work of a guest, the work of a person. There was the Dower House Library, decades neglected, its catalogue a ruin. The dowager's eyes were too poor for the small hand of the old ledgers, and her temper too short for any of the 3 secretaries Wexcombe had sent, and sent away. Eleanor, who had kept her uncle's accounts for 5 years for the privilege of her keep, and had a hand like copperplate, and a head for figures that Reginald Vane had used without ever once thanking, found herself within an hour at a long table by a tall window, sorting a duke's grandmother's correspondence into 30 years of order, and discovered that she was, for the first time in 8 years, content. The duke came every day. He came on the pretext of seeing his grandmother, and he saw his grandmother for precisely as long as politeness required, and then he came and stood at the end of Eleanor's long table, and did not loom, having been broken of looming. And they talked. She had braced for courtship, and got conversation instead, which was far more dangerous, because courtship she knew how to refuse, and conversation crept up on her unguarded. He was not what a duke was supposed to be. That was the first contradiction, and she catalogued it the way her father had taught her to catalogue the stars, one fixed point at a time. A duke was supposed to be idle. This one rose before his grooms, and rode his own land, and came back with mud to the knee, and an argument with his steward unfinished. A duke was supposed to be ignorant of his tenants. This one knew which of the marsh cottages had a leaking roof, and which widow's pig had got into whose turnips, and the Christian name of every child on the home farm. A duke was supposed to talk of horses and the hunt. This one had read, it seemed, everything, and quarrelled with her happily across the long table, about whether Mr. Richardson's Clarissa was a tragedy or a tantrum, and lost the quarrel with a grace that told her he was not used to losing, and did not mind it from her. "You argue like your father," he said one grey afternoon, 3 weeks in, looking up from a volume he had pulled off her sorted shelf. "He had the same trick of agreeing with the part of you that was right, so that you never noticed he had demolished the rest." Eleanor's pen stopped. It was the first time he had spoken of her father since the carriage, and she found she had been waiting for it, the way you wait for a step in the dark. "You keep saying you knew him," she said, "but you have never said how. He was a sea captain, Your Grace. He did not move in your world. He came home between voyages to a small house in Devon, and mended his own nets out of habit, and frightened the vicar by knowing more Greek than he did. How does a duke come to know a man like that?" The duke was quiet. He turned the book over in his large hands. She had noticed that he did that, when a question came too close, handled some near object as though it could absorb the difficulty, and she watched him decide how much to say. "I will tell you," he said at last, "but not yet." "You are forever telling me not yet." "I know." The corner of his mouth moved. "It is the worst of my faults, and there is a long list. I tell you not yet because the telling of it is the one thing I have to give you that is wholly mine to give, and once I give it I cannot take it back, and I find—" He stopped. He set the book down very carefully, square to the table's edge. "I find I am in no hurry to reach the end of this, of sitting in a quiet room while you put my grandmother's life in order, and tell me I am wrong about Clarissa. I have not been in many quiet rooms, Miss Vane. I should like to stay in this one a while, before I spoil it with the truth." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in 8 years, and it frightened her more than her uncle's contempt ever had, because contempt asked nothing of her, and this asked everything. "You assume," she said, to cover it, "that the truth will spoil it. Truths between people like us generally do." He looked at her then, and the grief she had seen the first night was very close to the surface. "But perhaps you are the exception. You have been the exception to a great many things I believed about the world. I am learning not to wager against you." She bent her head over the ledger so he would not see her face, and the kingfisher seal on the old letter under her hand, her father's leaping bird, pressed into red wax on a paper she had not yet opened, filed somewhere in 30 years of a stranger's correspondence, went for the moment unremarked between them. She caught the steward in her second week, and it was that, more than anything she said about Clarissa, that changed how the Duke of Wexcombe looked at her. It was a small thing, the kind of thing only a woman who had kept a careful man's books for 5 hungry years would have seen. The Dower House ran on a quarterly reckoning that passed through the hands of one Mr. Pigeon, a soft, round man with a soft, round manner, who had served the Dowager 20 years and brought her the totals each quarter day with a bow and a sigh over the wickedness of the price of coal. Eleanor, putting the household ledgers in order alongside the correspondence, laid 4 years of Mr. Pigeon's coal accounts side by side on the long table one grey afternoon, and sat very still over them for a long time. "You have the look," said the Dowager, from her chair by the fire, not lifting her eyes from her embroidery, "of my own grandmother, the day she found out the curate was watering the communion wine. Out with it, child. What have you found?" "Coal," said Eleanor. "Your coal, Your Grace. The Dower House burns, by Mr. Pigeon's account, 11 chaldron of coal each winter quarter. Harcourt is half again the size of this house, and keeps twice the fires. And we burned 9. You are paying for 11 chaldron, and I should be very surprised if 6 ever come up the drive. And the candles. Wax candles, 4 dozen the month, in a house of one lady who is abed by 10 and keeps tallow in the servants' hall. Someone is selling your light and your warmth out the back gate, Your Grace, and writing you the bill for both." The Dowager set down her embroidery. "Pigeon," she said, "has served me 20 years. Then he has robbed you for 20 years, and grown careless and lazy at it, which is how I caught him. A careful thief varies his figures, and Mr. Pigeon stopped troubling 2 years ago, because no one was looking." Eleanor turned the ledger so the old woman could see the column. "I may be wrong. I have been a guest in your house a fortnight, and it is a great impertinence to call your steward a thief over the coal. But you told me to put your accounts in order, and an account with a hole in it is not in order, and I find I cannot leave a hole alone. It is a failing of mine." It was at that moment, unheard, that the Duke came in. He had a way of arriving in the middle of things, and stood inside the door and took in the scene. His grandmother white about the mouth, his guest with ink on her thumb, pointing at a column of figures, the word thief still warm in the air. "Eleanor believes Pigeon has been robbing me," said the Dowager with awful calm. "For 20 years," said Eleanor. "I will show you, Your Grace, if you will sit. It is in the coal, and the wax, and I think the malt, though the malt is cleverer, and I have not run it down yet." The Duke did not sit. He came and stood at her shoulder, and looked down at the 4 years of accounts laid out in her neat hand, with his uncatalogued ledger reduced to a confession. And Eleanor was very aware of him there, the warmth and bulk of him, the faint smell of horse and cold air, and she kept her finger on the column, and her eyes on the page, and explained, fact by fact, exactly how a soft, round man had carried his master's family for a fool. When she had done, there was a silence. "My father," the Duke said slowly, "lost the better part of his fortune and the better part of his reason to men who flattered him while they robbed him, and not one of his clever London lawyers ever caught a farthing of it back. And you have run down Pigeon's coal in a fortnight, sideways, while you were meant to be filing my grandmother's letters." He looked at her, and there was the beginning of the river morning smile, though she did not yet know to call it that. "Miss Vane, I begin to think your uncle is the stupidest man in England. He had the keeping of the sharpest pair of eyes in 3 counties, and he put them below the salt and called them a disgrace." "He had no holes he wished found," said Eleanor quietly, and saw, by the flicker in the Duke's face, that the sentence had landed somewhere it had not been aimed. They put Mr. Pigeon to the question together the next morning, the Duke grave and silent at the window where he was decorative and dangerous, Eleanor at the table with the figures, the Dowager presiding from her chair like a hanging judge in bombazine. And the soft, round man stammered, and confessed to the coal and the wax, and, when pressed on the malt, to the malt as well, and was turned off without a character before noon. And the Dowager, who had said almost nothing throughout, caught Eleanor's wrist as she gathered the papers afterward, and held it a moment in her dry old hand. "You did that," the old woman said, "for a house that is not yours, and a family that owes you nothing, and an old woman who called you a scandal in dove-grey poplin the night you came. Why?" "Because you told me to put your accounts in order," said Eleanor, "and I find I cannot leave a hole alone. I told you, it is a failing." "It is not a failing." The dowager released her. "It is the only virtue worth the name, and your father had it, and it is why my grandson has not slept properly in 8 years for a debt he could not pay. Go and find him. He is in the stables, brooding, which he does when he feels too much and has no one to tell it to. Tell him he is wrong about something. It is the only thing that cheers him." She found the letter on a wet Thursday at the bottom of the year's first true rain. She had been 3 weeks at the Dower House, and the library was nearly done. Only the personal correspondence of the late Duke remained, 2 deep drawers of it that the Dowager had told her to burn unread, and that Eleanor, being constitutionally incapable of burning a written word unread, had been quietly cataloguing instead. It was among these, between a wine merchant's dunning note and a sermon a bishop had never been thanked for, that her own father's hand stopped her heart. She knew it before she knew it. The paper was folded in thirds and pressed flat with the thumbnail, rather than smoothed with a bone, the way only one man she had ever known folded a letter, and the red wax bore the small, leaping bird, the kingfisher. Fidem servo. I keep faith. The direction was to the Duke of Wexcombe. The hand was Captain Edmund Vane's, a little shaken at the downstrokes, the hand of the man writing in the last winter of his life, with the fever already in him. It had never been burned. It had never, she saw, been answered. The seal was broken. It had been read, but it had been kept 8 years in a dead man's drawer among the dunning notes, and the keeping of it told its own story before she read a word. She should have set it aside. It was not hers. It was addressed to him. Every rule of conduct she had ever been taught said, "Put it down." She did not put it down. She sat at the long table, with the rain running grey down the tall window, and she opened her father's last letter, and she read it. "My Lord Duke, you will forgive an old sailor his bluntness, for I have not the time left to learn the long way round. You owe me nothing, whatever you believe. A man who pulls another from the sea does only what the sea would have him do. There is no debt in it, and I have spent 8 years trying to make you see that, and failing, because you are your father's son in the one good way, and carry what is not yours to carry. So I will not ask you to repay a debt that does not exist. I will ask you a favor instead, which is a different thing, and may be refused. I am dying. The fever has me, and I have done with pretending otherwise to anyone but my girl, who knows and is braver than I am. When I am gone, she goes to my brother Reginald at Harcourt, there being no one else. And Reginald is a careful man, and a cold one, and I have never in my life trusted him with a thing I loved. While she is a child, he will keep her, because the world is watching, and a niece is a cheap enough charity. But she comes into her mother's portion at 25, and it is not small. And the day it falls due, my brother will have a choice to make between his honor and his purse. And I know which my brother chooses. I have seen him choose it before. So here is my favor, my lord, and the whole of it. I do not ask you to marry her, or dower her, or rescue her from a tower. I ask you only this. In the year my Eleanor turns 25, look in on her. Send a man to the assizes to watch how Reginald keeps her. If all is well, do nothing, and burn this, and we are quits. But if my brother has turned on her, if you find her cast down, or shamed, or robbed of what is hers, then keep faith with her father, who kept faith with you, and do not let her stand alone in a cold room with no one. That is all. A child should not have to stand alone in a cold room. It is the one thing I cannot bear, going where I am going, to think she might. Fidem servo. I keep faith. See that you do. Eleanor put the letter down on the table very gently, as though it might break, and found that she was weeping after all. Silently, the way she had taught herself, the tears falling straight down onto the Duke's grandmother's sorted correspondence. Not for grief, or not only for grief, but for the unbearable arithmetic of it. A cold room. He had written a cold room 8 years ago, lying in his own, and 3 weeks past she had stood in exactly that room, below the salt at Harcourt, with her uncle's finger pointing at the door, and a man had crossed it. She understood, now, the look she had not been able to name the first night. Recognition. He had been looking for her in the room all evening. He'd come to the harvest dinner not as a guest, but as a sentinel 8 years late to his post, half hoping, she thought, to find all well, to do nothing and burn the letter and be quits. And instead, he had found her standing alone in the cold room her father had dreaded, and he had kept faith. She did not hear him come in. She never did. For so large a man, he moved very quietly, a thing she would later learn he had taught himself on a heaving deck at 20, with strangers all around him and his name a danger. He saw the letter, and he saw her face. And he stopped in the doorway with the rain at his back, and the careful gravity he wore like a coat fell entirely off him. "You found it," he said. "You should have told me." Her voice was steadier than she expected. 3 weeks of not yet. You let me think you were a stranger doing a strange kindness, when all the while you were... She pressed the heel of her hand to her mouth. "He wrote you a cold room. And you came. Why would you not simply tell me?" The Duke came into the room. He did not approach her. He kept the length of the table between them, as a man keeps a fence between himself and a thing he is not sure will let him near. "Because," he said, "the moment you knew, it became a debt again. To you. And I've watched you these 3 weeks refuse every kindness that smelled of charity. The gown my grandmother offered, the coach to Bath you still mean to take, the very chair you sit in, which you earn 10 times over before noon, so that you need not feel you take it for nothing. I knew the instant I told you, you would weigh everything I had done, and everything I might do, on the scale of your father's letter. And you would decide that I had crossed that room out of guilt, to discharge an obligation. And you would be too proud to be the discharge of any man's debt. And you would go to Bath." He drew a breath. "And I did not want you to go to Bath, Miss Vane. I found, some way in the 2nd week, that I did not want you to go anywhere at all. And that had nothing to do with your father, and everything to do with a woman who told me I was wrong about Clarissa, with ink on her thumb." The rain ran down the window. The deerhound sighed by the cold grate. Eleanor sat with her father's voice still in her ears. "I keep faith. See that you do." And looked at the man her father had pulled from the sea, and could not for the life of her find the trap she had been hunting for 3 weeks. "That is a very pretty speech," she said at last, unsteadily. "For a man who claims to be a coward." "I am a coward about precisely one thing." He came around the table then, slowly, giving her every chance to stop him. And when she did not, he took the letter up from where it lay, and folded it again along its old creases, in thirds, the way her father had, and pressed the fold with his thumbnail. "I will tell you the rest of it now, all of it, the sea and my father, and how I came to owe a Devon sea captain my life and my name both. You have earned the whole of it, but not in this room, with you weeping over the page. Come and walk with me. The rain is easing. I have wanted to show you the kingfisher reach on the river for a fortnight, and I have a thing to tell you that wants the open air." She went. The rain had thinned to a bright, wet mist by the time they reached the Alder Walk, and the Duke told her, at last, the whole of it, in the plain, unhurried voice of a man laying down a weight he had carried so long he had to think how to set it down. "I was 20, he said, and I was running away. You should understand what my father had become by then. He had gambled and been flattered, and signed papers he did not read, and by the spring of that year, Wexcombe was a hollow thing. The land mortgaged twice over, the name a joke in every club in London, my mother selling her own jewels quietly to pay the kitchen, my younger brother 9 years old and not yet told. And I was 20, and a coward, and instead of staying to mend it, I decided the only honourable thing was to disappear, to take ship under a false name to the Indies, make a fortune or be lost, and spare them the spectacle of an heir to a ruin. I told myself it was nobility. It was funk. I crept aboard a Bristol merchantman as one Mr. Gabriel Thorne, with £40 and a change of linen, and I did not leave so much as a letter. He paused, watching the slow brown water. We were 3 days out when the weather came on. I will not frighten you with the particulars. You are a sailor's daughter, and have likely heard worse at your father's own table. It is enough to say the ship struck in the dark, and went down by the bow within the hour, and I was in the cold sea before I rightly understood I was off the deck, with a spar under one arm, and the lights of the ship going under one by one, and the certainty, quite calm, quite total, that I had run away to die under a false name, and no living soul would ever know what had become of the Duke of Wexcombe's eldest son. "And my father found you," Eleanor said softly. "Your father found me." He smiled, but his eyes were wet, and he did not trouble to hide it from her. The Kingfisher, his own ship, can you credit it, the very bird, was running for the same harbour and put about in foul weather against every prudent counsel of his mate, because Edmund Vane would not pass drowning men by to save his cargo. They pulled 9 of us out of that sea. I was the last, half drowned and raving. He paused, the brown water sliding by. When I came to myself 2 days later, in a swinging cot, dry and alive and ashamed, your father was sitting beside me, mending a net, because he could not abide an idle hand. He looked at me over his work, and he said, I have never forgotten one word of it. He said, "I know who you are, lad. I knew your grandfather. You've your mother's chin and your father's folly, and you've thrown yourself in the sea to spare yourself a hard winter's work, which is the act of a child, not a duke." Eleanor laughed despite herself, a small, wet sound, because she could hear it, could hear her father's flat Devon voice saying exactly that. The same voice that had told her the world was not so dark as it looked from a sick room. I begged him not to expose me, the Duke went on. I had my whole craven plan still, the Indies, the false name, the fortune. And he heard me out, the whole of it. And then he set down his net and he said the 4 words I have built the rest of my life on. He said, "Go home and mend it." That was all. No sermon, no bargain. He set me ashore at the next port with my own £40 returned to me, and a clean shirt off his own back, and he would not take a farthing. And he said the sea owed no man a debt for doing what the sea would have him do, and that if I wished to thank him, I might do it by being worth the saving. He turned the matter over a moment, as though it still amazed him, and I went home. I told my mother the truth. I sold what could be sold, and worked what could be worked, and learned my own land cottage by cottage, and in 8 years I made Wexcombe whole again, and the whole of it, every reach of that river, and every name on that home farm, exists because a Devon sea captain turned his ship around in a gale for 9 strangers, and then told the drowning coward to go home and mend it. The mist had lifted entirely now. The light came gold and level across the wet grass. I wrote to him for years, the Duke said. He would write back, never long, always blunt, always signed with the little bird. I tried a dozen ways to repay him, and he refused every one. Refused money, refused a place, refused a word at the Admiralty for his advancement, because he did not want advancing. He wanted only his ship and his nets, and, I came to understand from the letters, a daughter in Devon. He loved past all reason, and worried over like a man worrying a sore tooth. And then one winter the letters stopped, and the last of them, when it came, was not to thank me or to scold me, but to ask me the one favor he ever asked in his life. He looked at her then, the gold light full on his face. You have read it. You know the favor. A child should not have to stand alone in a cold room. He spent his last strength, Eleanor, not on fear of what was coming, but on the fear that you might one day stand exactly where I found you standing. And I had his letter 8 years, and I told myself there was time, and I very nearly let his one favor go unkept. I will carry that to my grave, that I almost did not come. Eleanor walked a little way in silence, the kingfisher reach murmuring beside them, her father suddenly so present on that bank that she half expected to see him mending a net at the water's edge. He pulled you out of the sea, she said at last. And you have spent 8 years thinking you owed him your life. But that is not the debt, is it? The debt is the 4 words. Anyone might fish a drowning man from the water. Only a particular sort of man tells him to go home and mend what is his, and means it, and makes him believe it. She stopped, and looked up at the Duke of Wexcombe, and something in her had begun, dangerously, to unfreeze. He told me the same thing, you know. Different words. Near the end, with the fever on him. He said the world was not so dark as it looked, and that there were good men still, and that I must promise to let one of them help me some day, and not be too proud. She gave a small, unsteady laugh. I have been very proud, Your Grace, for 8 years. I am only now beginning to suspect he sent you to make a liar of me. Then let us both be worth the saving, said the Duke, very low, and did not reach for her hand, though she saw that he wanted to, and the not reaching was somehow worse and better than the reaching would have been. It was not the river that found them first. It was the world. They had 3 more weeks of grace, 3 weeks in which Eleanor learned the whole of it, the wreck and the false name, and the boy of 20 Edmund Vane had fed and set ashore, and turned back toward his ruined house with 4 blunt words. Go home and mend it. 3 weeks in which she watched the Duke of Wexcombe stop calling it a debt, and start, haltingly, like a man relearning a language, simply to call. The Dowager watched them both with her hawk's eye and her sharp tongue, and said to Eleanor only once, He laughs now. He did not laugh before you. I am too old to thank God for much, but I shall thank him for that. And then rang for Ratafia before either of them could be embarrassed. But Harcourt had not forgotten, and Reginald Vane was a careful man. The first sign was the newspaper, a London weekly that traded in initials and innuendo, carried, in its 3rd week of November, a paragraph about a certain noble D of W-shire, who had been observed to take a singular interest in the disgraced niece of a respectable baronet, and asked, archly, whether the lady's reputation or the gentleman's judgment had suffered the greater wreck. The Dowager read it aloud at breakfast, in a voice of arctic contempt, and then put her foot through the newspaper, literally, dropping it on the floor and grinding her heel into the offending column. Reginald, said Eleanor very quietly. It is Reginald. He planted it. He plants everything. That is how the scandal began at Harcourt. A whisper here, a paragraph there, until the whisper was a fact, and no one could say who had spoken it first. She set down her cup. He is not done with me. I had thought, being thrown away, that I was at least thrown clear. But I am not clear, am I? There is something I have that he still wants. The Duke looked up from the ruined newspaper, and there was something in his face she had not seen before. Not grief this time. The cold, banked anger of a man who has found the thing he has been hunting. Your portion, he said. Your mother's portion. That falls due in 3 weeks, on your 25th birthday. He cannot touch it while you are unwed and of sound name, for the trustees would balk. But a woman publicly disgraced, cast out, with no protector and no roof. Such a woman, the trustees might be persuaded, is plainly unfit to manage a fortune, and had far better leave it in the careful hands of her devoted uncle, who took her in out of Christian charity and was so cruelly repaid. He stood. That is the whole of it, Eleanor. That is why the cold room. He did not throw you away in temper. He threw you away on a schedule. He needed you ruined and friendless before your birthday, so that no court in England would hand the money to a fallen woman over her respectable guardian. The fire cracked. The deerhound's ears went flat at the change in the room.
Then he has made one mistake,
Eleanor said, and she was surprised to hear how steady her own voice had become, how much 3 weeks of being kept faith with had given her back. I am no longer friendless, and I am no longer without a roof. No, said the Duke of Wexcombe softly. You are not. Reginald Vane came to the Dower House himself 3 days later, and made the mistake of his life. He came in his second-best carriage, with his oldest expression of pained Christian duty, and he was shown into the firelit drawing-room before anyone thought to refuse him, because a baronet calling on his own niece at a duke's grandmother's house was not, on its face, a thing a footman could turn away. Eleanor was at her table by the window when he entered. She rose, and felt the old cold settle over her at the sight of him, the 5 years of below the salt folding back over her like a familiar shroud, and was furious with herself for it. Eleanor, said her uncle, with infinite gentleness, as though to a runaway he had forgiven in advance. My dear child, I have come to take you home. This is not your house, Sir Reginald, said the dowager, from her chair, without rising. And she is not your child. And you may say what you came to say standing, for I shall not be offering you the malt. Reginald turned his pained smile upon the old woman. Your Grace, I honour your charity, but you cannot know what you have taken in. My niece is a wayward and an ungrateful girl, and her presence here, however innocently meant, does your grandson's name an injury that I, as her guardian, cannot in conscience permit to. My guardian, said Eleanor, until 3 weeks ago, called me a disgrace past mending in front of 3 counties, and ordered me taken away. You have come 10 miles in your second carriage, uncle, to reclaim a thing you threw on the fire. I should like to know why. We both know you do not want me. So tell this room what it is you do want, and let us all stop performing. Something flickered behind Reginald Vane's mild eyes, the first true thing she had seen in his face in 5 years, and it was fear, swiftly mastered, and it told her she had struck the bone. It was then that the Duke came in. He had been in the yard. He came in with the cold on him and the riding crop still in his hand, and he took one look at Reginald Vane standing in his grandmother's drawing-room with his hat in his hands and his Christian sorrow on his face, and the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees. Sir Reginald, he said, you are on my land, in my grandmother's house, troubling my guest. You have, I should think, a very great deal you wish to explain, but not to me, to the trustees of your brother's estate, in the matter of a portion that falls due in 19 days, and that you have spent 3 weeks blackening your own niece's name to lay your hands upon. Did you imagine I would not count the days, Vane? Did you imagine her father's friends could not count? Reginald Vane went the colour of tallow, the same colour, Eleanor noted with a cold clarity, that he had gone at his own dinner table the night the Duke crossed the room. I do not know, he said, and his voice had lost its oil. What slanders this girl has poured into your ear. She has poured nothing, said the Duke. She is far too proud to complain of you, which is the cruelest trick you ever played on her, for it left her defending your good name out of sheer dignity long after you had ruined hers. Now, Sir Reginald, the arithmetic is mine. A scandal manufactured to a calendar. A niece ruined 3 weeks before her money comes to you. I've seen cleaner work from worse men. Now take your second-best carriage off my land, and when next you see your niece, it will be across a table with the trustees between you, and you will not enjoy the meeting. For one moment, Reginald Vane looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, the careful mask gone, and what was underneath was not gentleness, and never had been. It was the flat, calculating coldness of a man who had weighed his brother's child against a sum of money and found her the lighter. And he said, very quietly, so that only she quite heard it, "You always were a clever, grasping little baggage, just like your father. He thought himself too good for his own family, and look where it left him. You will end the same. No duke marries a disgraced niece, my dear. He amuses himself, and then he marries a fortune, and you will find yourself in the cold again, with no one, and no one crosses a room for you twice." He bowed to the dowager, and he did not bow to the duke, and he went. The drawing room was silent after the carriage had ground away down the drive. Eleanor stood very straight by her table, and found that her uncle's last words had gone into her like a splinter too fine to pull out. He amuses himself, and then he marries a fortune. And she despised herself for the splinter, and could not get it out. "Do not," said the dowager, watching her with her hawk's eye, "let that cold serpent's last hiss take root in you, child. He saw what holds you to my grandson, and he reached for it, because it is the only weapon a coward keeps, the doubt you already carry. Pull it out and throw it on the fire." "I shall try," said Eleanor. She did not throw it on the fire. She carried it, small and cold, all the rest of that week, and it was waiting, patient as a planted seed, when she found the settlement papers on the library table. The Duke's first instinct was rank, and Eleanor refused it. He would, he said, that very afternoon, ride to Harcourt and put it to Reginald Vane directly, Duke to Baronet, that the slanders would cease and the portion be paid clean, or the consequences would be such as a country baronet could not survive. He was halfway to the stables, in fact, before she caught his sleeve in the cold yard and made him stand still and hear her. "And he will bow and apologize and pay nothing," she said. "And the moment your back is turned, he will tell the trustees that the disgraced niece has now got herself a ducal protector, by methods that hardly bear description, which only proves the original charge. Don't you see? Your rank is the very weapon he wants you to swing. Every time a powerful man rescues me, my uncle gets to ask the world what I did to earn the rescue. You cannot win me my name by force. It must be won with proof, or it is not won at all." He stood in the cold yard with his breath smoking, and looked at her, and slowly the anger went out of his shoulders, and something like respect came into its place. "Then tell me where the proof is," he said, "and I will get it however you say." So she told him. She had kept Reginald Vane's books for 5 years. She knew the shape of his frauds, the way a housekeeper knows the smell of damp behind a wall. To take her portion, he would need her father's will, and the will alone would not serve him. Captain Edmund Vane had left his daughter's mother's money clean to his daughter, with the family solicitor in Plymouth as trustee, and not one word giving Reginald any discretion over it whatsoever. Eleanor had seen the true will read aloud in a Devon parlour when she was 17. She remembered every line. "So he has forged a codicil," she said. "He must have. A later page, in my father's hand or near enough, naming himself trustee in the Plymouth man's place, with power to withhold the money should I prove, what was the newspaper's phrase? Of doubtful character. He will present it to the trustees before my birthday. It will be very well done. Reginald does nothing by halves. But it cannot be perfect, Your Grace, because there is one thing in all the world he could not forge." She drew the chain up from inside her collar. On it hung a ring, a man's signet, too big for any finger of hers, worn bright at the band, and on its face, cut deep and a little worn, a small bird in the act of leaping, and beneath it, in letters she had traced with her thumb 10,000 times, "Fidem Servo." "My father's signet went into the churchyard with everything else," she said. "Also my uncle believes. He does not know my father gave it me the last week of his life, off his own hand, and told me to keep it close and tell no one, because a man's seal is his word, and his word should belong to his child and not his brother. Reginald has spent 8 years sealing my father's name with a copy, a cast, a forger's bird. But the true bird has been around my neck the whole while. Any codicil he produces will bear a seal that does not match this one. Set them side by side before the trustees, and his forgery proves itself. The Duke looked at the little leaping bird in her palm, warm from the skin of her throat, and then at her face. And Eleanor watched him understand that the woman in the turned grey gown he had carried out of a cold room had been carrying, all this while, the one weapon that could win the war. "Plymouth," he said. "The true will is lodged with the solicitor in Plymouth. 3 days' ride, less on your horses." She closed her hand over the ring. "Bring the true will north before my birthday. I will face the trustees myself, with the will in one hand and the true seal in the other. And I will let my uncle hang himself on his own clever forgery, in front of the only men whose opinion he cannot plant or pay. That is how it is done, not with a duke's fist, with a dead sailor's ring, and his daughter's good memory." "God help Reginald Vane," said the Duke of Wexcombe, with the first wide and unguarded smile she had ever seen on him. "For he has thrown away the most dangerous woman in England. And I have picked her up." They had one perfect morning before it broke. The will was sent for. A fast man went south on a fast horse, and there was nothing to do but wait out the long week his errand to Plymouth and back would take. And on the morning he rode out, the rain lifted clean off the country and gave them a still, grey-gold morning with frost burning off the stubble. The Duke came at dawn, before the household stirred, and stood under Eleanor's window like a boy, and would not say where they were going, and walked her down through the wet park to the river to see, at last, the Kingfisher reach. It was a quiet stretch, where the water ran slow and deep under a leaning alder, and they stood very still on the bank in the cold gold light, and waited, and did not speak. And at length the bird came. A sudden line of blue, electric, impossible. A struck spark fired straight down the middle of the brown river and gone again into the far bank before the eye could fix it. "Oh," Eleanor breathed. "Oh, that is why he chose it." "I have watched that reach 100 mornings," the Duke said low beside her. "I never once thought to bring another soul to it. I think I was keeping it. I did not know what for." He was quiet a moment. "I know now." She did not look at him. If she had looked at him, she would have lost the morning to the size of what was coming, and she wanted the morning. So she watched the place where the bird had been, and said lightly, to keep them both safe a little longer, "When the lilacs come, you must show me the rest of it, whatever else you have been keeping. The whole estate, reach by reach, until I know it as well as you do." It was a small sentence. It was also a future, spoken plainly, when the lilacs come, as though the spring were a thing they would have together, and she heard it leave her mouth, and did not call it back. Beside her the Duke went very still. "When the lilacs come," he said, and his voice was not quite steady. "I will show you every reach of it, and every cottage, and the names of every child, until there is nothing left of mine that is not also yours." He turned to her, there on the cold bank in the burning frost, and took her hand. Not the rescue grip of the first night, not the duty of a kept promise, but something that asked rather than took. "Eleanor, I had meant to wait until your name was clean, to ask you nothing while the trustees and your uncle still hung over us, so that you could never wonder afterward whether you had said yes to a rescue. But I am too greedy this morning to be honorable. When this is finished, when the bird is yours and the money is yours and your father's faith is kept, will you—" "Don't," she said. She did not mean it as it sounded. She meant only, "Stop. The morning is too perfect. Let me have it one moment longer before the world." But her own heart had turned coward at the very edge of being happy. 8 years of being a charity and a problem and a thing arranged had taught her that the floor falls away precisely when you trust it. And the word came out hard, and she saw it land on him like cold water. "Forgive me," he said at once, withdrawing, the careful coat going back on over the unguarded man. "You are right. Not now. After. I am sorry. Watch the river. He may come again." The bird did not come again. They walked back through the burning frost, not quite touching, and Eleanor, who had been one word away from the only future she had ever wanted, held the word she should have said behind her teeth, and could not, for pride and old fear, get it out, and told herself there would be time. After, when the lilacs came. There was not time. That was the lesson the cold room had tried to teach her, and she had not yet learned it. The settlement papers came that evening, and they undid her. She had not been meant to see them. They lay on the library table, where the Duke's man of business had left them, 3 sheets in a clerk's fair hand, and Eleanor, passing with a candle on her way to bed, saw her own name at the head of the first sheet, and stopped, the way one always stops at one's own name, and read before she could think not to. It was a marriage settlement. It was generous past anything she could have imagined. A jointure, pin money, the dower house for her own should she be widowed. Every line of it arranged to make her safe past any man's power to throw her away again. And at the foot, in the Duke's own hand, a note to his lawyer that she read 3 times standing in the dark with the candle shaking. Because the candle was shaking. Because her hand was. Draw it so the marriage stands regardless of the trustee's verdict. Whatever they decide of her portion, she is to be provided for wholly out of Wexcombe. I will not have it said I married her for her money or to settle Vane's account. The debt to her father is mine. It is to be discharged in full by this. See that the deed reflects it. Discharged in full. The debt to her father. By this. Eleanor set the candle down very carefully on the table so that she would not drop it, and stood in the cold library with the truth she had hunted for 3 weeks finally in her 2 hands, and found it was the truth she had dreaded after all. He had crossed the room for a dead man's promise. He had taken her hand below the salt to keep faith with Edmund Vane, and the marriage was the keeping of it, the discharge, in full, of a debt, set down in a lawyer's deed so that the world and his own conscience would know the books were square. The morning by the river had been kind. He was a kind man. Kind men dress their duties in tenderness because it costs them nothing and eases the doing. But she knew now what she was. She was an account. She had been an account at Harcourt, kept below the salt at her uncle's careful charity, and she was an account at Wexcombe still, kept warm now and dressed soft. But an account. A thing owed. A thing to be discharged in full and ticked off and set down. A child should not have to stand alone in a cold room, her father had written. He had not written, and a woman should not have to spend her life as the settling of a debt. He had not thought of that, dying. He had thought only to keep her safe, and he had. Gabriel would keep her safe to the end of her days, out of pure faith with the dead man, and she would grow old in the dower house, as the kept promise of a sea captain she could barely remember. Beloved the way a duty is beloved, and never once for herself, with ink on her thumb, telling him he was wrong about Clarissa. She did not weep. She had taught herself not to, and the old lesson held even now. She went up to her room, and she took the kingfisher ring from around her neck and held it in her closed fist until the edges of the little leaping bird bit into her palm, and she made the only choice her pride had left her. She would not be discharged in full. She would not be any man's settled account, however gently kept. She would face the trustees herself, win her own name with her own father's seal, take her own portion into her own 2 hands, and then she would go, clear and clean, and owing nothing, and owed nothing. To Bath, to anywhere. To a life that was hers, and not the back page of another's ledger. She wrote no note. There was nothing she could have written that the deed on the library table had not already said better. Before first light, with the household abed and her father's ring coiled around her neck again, and her one bag packed as small as it had come. Eleanor Vane walked out of the dower house at Wexcombe alone, into the dark, on her own 2 feet, exactly as she had meant to walk out of Harcourt before a duke had crossed a room and taught her, briefly and ruinously, what it felt like not to be alone. The trustees met in the assembly room of the county town on the morning of Eleanor's 25th birthday, and she walked in alone. She had been days at the coaching inn, counting down to the hearing on the last of her own small coins, and on the morning itself, she had dressed with care in the dove-grey poplin, turned, pressed, the same gown she had worn below the salt, because she wanted the men in that room to see exactly what her uncle had thrown away, and call it disgraced to her face if they dared. She had slept not at all. She had her father's true will sent for, and feared it would not come. She had only the ring, warm at her throat, and her own clear memory, and the cold certainty that she would do this herself, or not at all. Reginald Vane was already there. He sat at the long table among the 3 trustees and the family solicitor, with the ease of a man who has arranged the room. And when Eleanor came in, unannounced and uninvited, his face did a small, remarkable thing. Surprise, swiftly buried under sorrow, the practiced public grief of a guardian whose ward has shamed herself past help. "Gentlemen," he said gently, "you see how it is. She comes to plead, poor creature, with no notion even of how she appears. Eleanor, my dear, this is no place for you. There is a chair in the passage." "There is a chair here," said Eleanor, and sat down in it at the foot of the table, below the salt, in the place he always gave her, and folded her hands, and looked at the 3 trustees one by one. "Gentlemen, my uncle has come to tell you I am unfit to hold my mother's portion. I have come to tell you why he says it. Will you hear me? You may put me back in the passage afterward if I have wasted your morning. But you will not, I think, want it said in 3 counties that the trustees of Edmund Vane's estate would not give his daughter 10 minutes on the day the trust fell due." The eldest trustee, a dry old man named Coombe, who had known her father, looked at her a long moment, and then at Reginald, and then said, "10 minutes, Miss Vane. Sit, Sir Reginald. The girl may speak." Reginald sat, and Eleanor, with no duke at her shoulder and no rank in her hand, took the room. She did not rage. She laid it out the way her father had taught her to read a chart, fact by fact. The cold scandal that had begun as a whisper and hardened into a paragraph, the careful timing of it 3 weeks before her birthday, the convenient codicil her uncle was about to produce, the convenient phrase of doubtful character that would put the money in his careful hands. She watched the 3 trustees' faces change as the schedule of it became plain, and then she said, "My uncle holds a paper he says is my father's will, with a later page giving him discretion over my portion. Let him show it. I ask only one thing of you first." She drew the chain up from her collar, over her head, and laid the signet ring on the white cloth in the center of the table, where the little leaping bird caught the window light. "My father sealed every true word of his life with this. It went, my uncle believes, into the churchyard. It did not. It came to me from his own hand the last week of his life. Whatever seal is on my uncle's paper, gentlemen, compare it to this. A man's word is his seal. Let us see whose word is on that page." The room went very quiet. Old Coombe reached out and took up the ring, and turned it to the light, and his dry face went carefully blank, and he said, "Sir Reginald, your paper, if you please." Reginald Vane did not move. "Surely," he said, and his voice had thinned. "We need not indulge a hysterical. Your paper, Sir Reginald." And there was nothing for it. The trustees were looking now, all 3, and the family solicitor with them, and a baronet who refused to produce the very document on which his whole claim rested was a baronet already hanged. With a hand that had begun, very slightly, to shake, Reginald Vane drew out the codicil and laid it on the table, and Coombe set the ring beside its red seal and bent his old head over the two birds. It took him perhaps 4 seconds.
"This bird," said Coombe, in the flat voice of a man reading a verdict,
"leaps to the left. The ring's bird leaps to the right. And the motto on the paper reads, Fidem Servio, which is no Latin at all, where the ring reads, Fidem Servo, which is the captain's own. Gentlemen, this seal was never made by this ring. This codicil is a forgery." He set it down as though it had soiled his fingers. "Sir Reginald Vane, you will explain to this table how your late brother came to seal his will with a ring that lies in his coffin, and a Latin he never owned. Or you will explain it to the magistrate, who keeps chambers, I believe, across the square." It was at that moment, with the forged bird leaping the wrong way on the white cloth, and Reginald Vane's careful face coming apart at last, that the doors of the assembly room opened, and the Duke of Wexcombe came in, with the true will of Edmund Vane in his hand, and a hard night's road on his coat. He had ridden through the dark. She could see it on him. The mud, the grey exhaustion, the wildness barely held. His own man had come up from Plymouth with the will at dusk, an hour after they found her room empty, and the Duke had not waited for dawn or for a fresh horse. He had taken the will from the messenger's hand and ridden through the night to put it before the trustees himself. His eyes went round the room and found her at the foot of the table, alone, with her father's ring on the cloth and the forgery already broken open before him. And she watched him understand that she had not needed rescuing after all, that she had walked in alone and won it alone, that he had ridden through the dark to arrive, at last, exactly 1 minute too late to save her, because she had saved herself. And the Duke of Wexcombe, in front of the 3 trustees and the solicitor and the unmaking baronet, began to laugh, the wide, unguarded laugh of the river morning, helpless with relief, and something very like awe. "Of course," he said. "Of course you did it without me." He came to the table and laid the true will down beside the false one, the genuine kingfisher leaping right beside the forger's leaping wrong, and he did not look at the trustees. He looked at her. "I have ridden all night to hand you a sword you did not need. You will let me, I hope, do one useful thing while I am here." He turned to Reginald Vane. There was no rank in his voice and no fist. There was only a quiet that was worse than either. "Sir Reginald, you pointed at a door and called your brother's child a disgrace to keep 3 weeks of forgery from coming to light. The trustees will deal with the forgery. The magistrate will deal with the rest. I will deal, personally and at length, with every paragraph you have ever planted in every paper, until the only name blackened in 3 counties is your own. You wanted an account settled. It is settled. Now get out, before I forget that I promised this lady the law would do my work for me." Reginald Vane got out. He went grey and silent past the foot of the table, past the niece he had kept below the salt for 5 years, and he did not look at her, and she found, watching him go, that she felt nothing for him at all. Not triumph, not hatred, only the clean weightlessness of a debt that someone else's lie had finally cancelled. Then the room was clearing, the trustees murmuring over the 2 wills, and the Duke crossed to her at the foot of the table, and the careful coat was entirely gone, and what stood in front of her was only a tired man who had ridden all night for nothing and could not stop smiling about it. "You ran," he said quietly. "I read your deed." She made herself meet his eyes. "Discharged in full. The debt to her father, discharged by this. I will not be discharged, Gabriel. I had rather be poor and free than be the squared account of the kindest man in England. I am sorry I ran. I am not sorry for the reason." Something crossed his face. Not hurt. Understanding. The swift and total understanding she had come to love, and could not let herself love. He reached into his coat. He took out a folded paper, in thirds, pressed with a thumbnail, The kingfisher hauled upon it, and she knew it. Her father's last letter, the favor, the cold room. See that you do. This, he said, is the only debt there ever was. It is the thing I have hidden behind for 3 weeks, even from myself. The honorable reason, the duty I could point to, so that I should never have to stand in front of you with nothing but the truth and risk you saying no. He held it out to her across the white cloth, over the broken forgery and the true will and the leaping ring. It is yours, Eleanor. Your father's last words, to you as much as to me. Burn it, keep it, throw it in my face. But it is finished as a debt this morning, because I am finished hiding behind it. He drew a breath, and the great, tired man's voice was not steady at all. I did not cross that room for your father. I told myself I did, for 3 weeks, because it was safer. I crossed it because I had read his letter 8 years ago, and built a picture of a child standing alone in a cold room, and I could not bear it. And then I walked into Harcourt, and the child was a woman, in a turned grey gown, who lifted her chin at her own ruin, and would not weep to please the man destroying her. And I was lost before I reached the foot of the table. He took 1 step nearer, the letter still held out between them like a thing surrendered. There is no debt in it. There is no faith being kept. There is only a man who wants, for the first and last time in his life and entirely for himself, to spend every morning he has left bringing you to one more reach of his river. Marry me for that, or do not marry me at all. But do not ever again call yourself an account. You are the only thing I have ever chosen that no one asked me to. The assembly room was empty around them now. The window light lay across the 2 wills and the little ring. Eleanor looked at the letter held out over the table. Her father's hand, her father's bird. I keep faith. And she did not take it to burn it. She took his hand instead. She closed her fingers over his, warm in the cold room, the way he had closed his over hers below the salt, 8 weeks and a whole life ago. And she held on, and she said, "Keep the letter. He was right about you. He was right about everything except one thing. He thought I would have to stand alone in a cold room, and I did, this morning, on purpose, because I needed to know I could." She tightened her grip. "I can. And now that I know it, I find I would very much rather not. When the lilacs come, Gabriel, you will show me every reach of your river. And I will not say don't. I will say yes. I am saying it now, so that you never have to wonder again." The Duke of Wexcombe lifted her hand to his mouth, there in the empty room where she had won her own name, and he did not let it go. He never did. The lilacs came in May. They came in great, heavy plumes against the south wall of Wexcombe, white and mauve, and so thick with scent that the bees reeled among them by noon. And Eleanor, the Duchess of Wexcombe now, these 2 months, married quietly in the home farm chapel with the dowager weeping furiously into her bombazine and swearing it was the damp, walked out through them on her husband's arm to see the kingfisher reach in spring. The dove-grey poplin was long since given to a housemaid who admired it. She wore willow-green silk, the colour of the new river light, because her husband liked to see her in colours after a lifetime of turned grey, and because she could. The portion was hers, clean and whole, lodged where her father had meant it, and she had used the first of it not on herself, but on a small, fast schooner, refitted for the orphans' charity in Plymouth, and named, over the dowager's objection that it was sentimental, the Fidem. Reginald Vane was 3 counties away and silent, his claim dead, his name the only blackened thing in the parish, and Eleanor thought of him perhaps once a month, and with less feeling each time. They stood on the bank in the green gold morning where once they had stood in the burning frost, and they waited, and did not speak. And at length the bird came, that struck blue spark, electric, impossible, fired down the middle of the bright river and gone. And Eleanor laughed aloud with the pure delight of it, and felt her husband's hand tighten over hers. "There," he said, "every reach of it, as I promised." "You have shown me one reach," she said. "There are 100. You will be showing me reaches for 40 years. "I am counting on it." He turned her to him in the lilac light, the great, grave, laughing man her father had pulled from the sea and sent home to mend what was his. And he took up her hand and pressed his thumb once, gently, to the old, worn band of the kingfisher ring she now wore on her own finger, resized to fit, the little bird leaping right. "Do you know what I thought?" he said, "the night I crossed that room? I thought, there is the bravest thing in England, and her own people are throwing her into the dark. And if I do not take her hand this instant, I will spend the rest of my life knowing I let go of the one thing worth holding." "And instead," said the Duchess of Wexcombe, closing her warm hand over her husband's in the spring sun, where 8 months before a frightened girl had put her cold hand into a stranger's and not understood why, "you took it, and you never let go." "No," he agreed, against her hair, "and I never will." The kingfisher came back down the bright reach, the way the truest things always come twice. And over the south wall, the lilacs poured their scent into the warm air, and on the river, where a dead sailor's faith still ran, 2 people who had each learned to stand alone in a cold room stood instead, by choice, in the sun, hand in hand, and held on. If you have ever been made to feel like a debt to be settled, rather than a person to be chosen, and then found, against all your careful armor, someone who crossed the whole room for you, then this was your story too. Tell me in the comments which moment held your breath, and if Eleanor and her duke warmed your evening, stay a while by the fire. There is always another story coming.